Started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mina Jane, and I am the director of the Ashland Public Library in Massachusetts. And I'm here with one of my very favorite speakers, Jeremy. Oh my gosh, I think it's just too cold. Jeremy D'Entremont, who's going to be talking about haunted lighthouses of New England. This is his third time around with us, so I think he's running out of material. But we will be enthusiastic, right, everyone? No matter what. So some of it we might have heard before, but I'm guessing that Jeremy will make it very, very interesting regardless. So a couple things before we get to him. I just want to say thanks to the Friends of the Ashland Public Library who support all of our programs. We couldn't do this stuff without them. I'd also like to thank Jeremy for letting us share this program with other libraries, because when libraries work together, we make magic, not haunted magic, but just regular magic. And Jeremy's gonna have slides, as you can see, his first one on the screen, and he's gonna be talking for about 45 minutes probably, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I will be turning the chat off during his slides, but you can still chat with me if you have a tech issue, and I'll turn the chat back on when he's done with his slides. But if you have questions, I will be taking them from the Q&A. So without further ado, as I said, Jeremy is one of my very favorite speakers. He knows everything about lighthouses of New England. He is a speaker for many organizations and has never, ever disappointed in the stories that he tells and the way that he tells them. So welcome, Jeremy. Thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much, Mina. It's nice to be back virtually. So thank you to everybody who's attending tonight. Maybe some of you saw my other talks, my other two talks about haunted lighthouses the last 2 years. This is a Halloween tradition, I guess, which is kind of neat. So this one is a bit different because if you saw the other ones, you know that I talked quite a bit about my own experiences and about paranormal investigations I've been part of, that type of thing. This is more like stories I've gathered, but it's still all within New England, and it's just amazing how many lighthouses have ghost stories somewhere in there. The fabric of the places. It's extremely common. I think if you dig deep enough with almost any lighthouse, you're going to find a ghost story or two in there somewhere. So I will just say, by way of introduction, that I've been doing lighthouse stuff for like 40 years or very close to it. And it's always the human history that interests me the most. Ghost stories are one aspect of that, but the stories of lighthouse keepers and their families are just so fascinating to me. So it's what I love to talk about. And I believe I'm going to be doing another talk for you in March, right, Mina, about Boston Lights. I'm looking forward to that as well.
Yep, that
Oldest
is
light
right.
station in
Can't
America.
wait.
Yeah. Yeah, very much looking forward to that. So let me move along here, and I'm actually going to start with a quote here. In the past versions of this, I've talked about I would say, kind of the duality of lighthouses, the fact that they're very positive symbols in our culture, but they also have what I like to call a dark side, and that the ghost stories certainly fit into that. And I love this quote from Virginia Woolf, the author of the classic novel To the Lighthouse. She said, lighthouses are endlessly suggestive signifiers of both human isolation and our ultimate connectedness to each other. So I think that sums it up nicely. The By connectedness, it's a very positive thing that lighthouses were built for no reason but to help people. So they're, like I said, a very positive symbol. But I always think there's something about a lighthouse, seeing that light flash in the darkness out in the distance, kind of sparks our imagination. So there are two very distinct sides to lighthouses. So I'm going to start down in southern New England. By the way, I'll just mention that, like I said, these are mostly stories I've gathered from all over. A lot of what I do have notes because this is a lecture I've never done before. So this is brand new. I do have notes to refer to, and at times I'll be reading things, and what I'm reading mostly is stuff from my own books. So I'm paraphrasing myself a lot of the time. Near the end, I am going to do kind of a little greatest hits medley, that stuff I've talked about in the previous presentations that have more to do with my personal experiences. But Anyway, I'm going to start down here in southern New England, just barely in New England, because this lighthouse is on the line out in Long Island Sound, the line between Connecticut and New York. It's just barely on the Connecticut side. In fact, the state of New York actually ceded the ledge to the federal government so they could build a lighthouse there. I love this lighthouse. It's like a little castle, a little stone castle. It's built in 1877. And I want to tell you a story that I think is one of the most interesting lighthouse stories anywhere. It's not most of it is not a ghost story, but there is a ghost story connected to it. But tell you that this is a true story. I'm going to tell you. In August of 1905, the head keeper at that time they had a head keeper and two assistants living at the lighthouse. So the head keeper was away on shore. In charge was first assistant keeper Marl Hulse, who's the man on the photo here with the impressive mustache. He was a 54-year-old Long Island native. And also at the lighthouse was a second assistant keeper named Julius Coster, who's from New York City, and he was a newcomer to the lighthouse service. Hulse was taken by surprise when Coster charged at him with a razor lashed to the end of a pole. Hulse fought off Coster, who seemed to calm down for the moment, but similar scenes took place over the next couple of days, and Hulse was forced to stay awake night and day. He not only had to defend himself against Coster, but he also had to make sure the light continued to function. So one afternoon, Hulse found Coster chopping at the lighthouse walls with a hammer and chisel. Later that night, Hulse became aware that the light had stopped rotating. Rushing to the lantern room, he found Coster holding an axe and about to destroy the lens. Hulse talked Coster out of doing that, out of destroying the light, but he didn't get a moment's rest or sleep, a moment of rest or sleep in the next 5 days as he protected himself and the light. Coster then threatened suicide, and help arrived. Finally, Coster was found with self-inflicted gashes on his neck, and he was taken to a hospital. It was reported later that Coster returned to New York City and succeeded at committing suicide. And here's where the ghost story comes in. It is said that later keepers at Stratford Shoal experienced disturbances at the lighthouse that they blamed on a ghost they called Julius. The reported phenomena included doors slamming themselves, chairs thrown against walls, and pans of hot water thrown from the stove. And I should mention the light was automated a few decades ago, so nobody's lived out there since then. A friend of mine briefly owned it, but it is now owned by somebody else, so I don't know. So I don't know if there's any recent stories about hauntings there. There's another story that relates to Stratford Shoal, but not to the lighthouse. It's actually a very well-known legend. There was a ship called the Trustful. This was in the early 1800s, ready to set sail out of Bridgeport with a load of church bells. And as it set sail, it ran into a major storm. The ship ran into Stratford Shoal and sank, drowning all aboard. Many mariners have claimed afterward that when approaching the shoal in bad weather, the muffled sound of church bells can be heard beneath the waves. So I haven't heard them. I can't vouch for that, but it is a really well-known legend. So moving along in Massachusetts, and I'm going to jump around geographically. This is Baker's Island. It's officially part of Salem, but it's actually closer to Manchester by the Sea and Beverly, Mass. Beautiful place. I grew up in Lynn, by the way, and Baker's Island was always off limits. It has a lot of private cottages, summer cottages on it, so it's considered a very private island. But a group called the Essex National Heritage Area now owns the light station, and they give tours out there in the summer, which I recommend. There have been claims over the years that some of the other summer homes on the island are haunted, and also there are two keepers' houses. You see one of them here, and also the keepers' houses. The lighthouse have a lot of stories. Andy Jerome was the caretaker for the Bakers Island Association, not strictly for the lighthouse, but for the whole island. Caretaker from 1983 to 87. He reported that the foghorn at the lighthouse would go off for no apparent reason on clear nights, and he sometimes had to get out of bed to rush over and turn it off. The Coast Guard checked; they couldn't find anything wrong. Andy Jerome's wife, Ruth, said she sensed a presence around the fog signal building. She was convinced the station was haunted, even though she said she didn't believe in ghosts, or at least not before that. Uh, a funny story I read is that a team of paranormal investigators once went out to do an investigation. They had all this fancy equipment, but a lot of it needed to be plugged in. And they didn't know there's no electricity on the island, or at least the part. I think there's generators out there, but not really too much electricity. So their investigation couldn't get started. I'm going to move. See, I'm going to show you a postcard first. I just want to mention that Baker's Island is one of seven places on the East Coast where there were two lighthouses at one time. One of them was torn down in the 1920s. They used to have two lighthouses at some places to make them easier to differentiate from the single lights. So moving back up into Maine, this is Matinicus Rock, which is one of the most isolated light stations in America. It's more than 20 miles off of Midcoast, Maine. Another place they used to have two lights, but you can see one of them was discontinued and the tower was capped, the one on the left. Uh, I'd say about 20 years ago now, I met a guy who was a Coast Guard keeper at Matinicus Rock. His name is Kevin Arsenal. And he told me that when he was assigned to Matinicus Rock as a young man, he was told there's a girl behind every tree. Now, look at this picture. How many trees do you see? So he realized when he got there, he was disappointed that there were no trees, so there were no girls. He was also informed that there was a resident ghost known as Mo. The ghost was said to be a spirit of a deceased keeper who had taken up residence in the extinguished North Tower, the one on the left here. And the word was that on some nights a glow could be seen coming through the windows of the dark tower, even though there was no light source in there. Arsenal told me he witnessed that glow on more than one occasion when there was no moon and supposedly nothing that could be reflecting on the glass or anything like that. So it was pretty well known to the Coast Guard guys out there. They investigated, but they never found any explanation, or at least no obvious explanation for the ghost of Mo, whoever Mo was. And here's an old postcard of Matinicus Rock back when both lights were active. It's famous as the site of a very famous story from the 1850s. A young girl, Abby Burgess, daughter of the keeper, 16 years old, kept the two lights burning for like 3 weeks through a number of winter storms while her father was away. It's an incredible story, subject of a children's book called Keep the Lights Burning, Abby. Jumping back down to southern New England, this is Bird Island Lighthouse off of Marion in southeastern Mass, not too far from New Bedford. This light station was established in 1819, which actually makes the lighthouse one of the oldest on the coast. There was a guy named William S. Moore who was the first keeper. He was a veteran of the War of 1812. And there's a lot of legends related to Keeper Moore. Some of the stories are true, and some of them definitely aren't. But they say one story is they say he was a pirate and that he was put on the island as the lighthouse keeper as punishment, which is ridiculous. The government would not have done something like that. And how could he be prisoner there anyway? It wasn't that far offshore, so that was a crazy story. And some sources say that he murdered his wife at the lighthouse. Supposedly, when they rebuilt the keeper's house, a rifle was found in a secret hiding place, and also a bag of tobacco. And the gun, of course, was believed by some to be the murder weapon. Uh, and supposedly, his wife, Keeper Moore's wife, is buried on the island, but nobody's ever found the grave site. So, as again with the gun, a bag of tobacco was found, and also a note. And the note read, "quote This bag contains tobacco found among the clothes of my wife after her decease. It was furnished by certain individuals in and about Sippaken, which is the village of Marion near the lighthouse there. May the curses of the high heaven rest upon the heads of those who destroyed the peace of my family and the health and happiness of a wife whom I dearly loved," unquote. So the part that's true is that his wife did die on the island, and apparently she died of I don't know if it was cancer or tobacco poisoning. But in any case, many people have said the place is haunted ever since then. And legend has it that some of the later keepers were frightened by the ghost of a hunched over old woman rapping at the door during the night. So, quite an image. And you notice there's no other buildings beside the lighthouse here. They're all washed away in the hurricane of 1938. Luckily, the keeper and his family had moved off of the island. The light had been automated just a couple of years before that. But sadly and ironically, that family that left here in 1936 was at a lighthouse in Rhode Island during the hurricane of 38. And 5 people died in the keeper's house at Prudence Island, Rhode Island, in the hurricane, including the keeper's wife and son. So they escaped disaster here, but just a couple of years later, they had quite a disaster at Prudence Island. And here's an old picture of Bird Island Lighthouse back when it had all its buildings with the lighthouse and also a so-called birdcage style lantern, old style lantern. Back up to Maine, and I just took this picture a couple of weeks ago. I just kind of co-led a U.S. Lighthouse Society tour in Maine just a couple of weeks ago. So I was here with the group. This is Burnt Island in Booth Bay Harbor. This lighthouse was built in 1821, so it's another one of the oldest on the coast. The keeper's house you see here was built later than that. But I want to tell you about a keeper by the name of James McCobb. Here's an old postcard of the lighthouse. James McCobb became keeper in 1868. He was there until 1880. He was a former sea captain who had settled down for the relatively quiet life of a lighthouse keeper at the age of 50. In a letter in 1869, he expressed happiness. He loved his life as a lighthouse keeper. He said, quote, "I was never more contented in my life. 'Tis so much better than anything else I could do, and I should dread so much having to go to sea again." So, unquote. So obviously he didn't enjoy his life at sea very much before he came to the lighthouse. They say, this is one of those they say stories, they say there have been numerous sightings of a ghostly woman in white bedclothes on the island, and some have speculated that she is the ghost of Martha McCobb, the keeper's wife, who died there. And jumping ahead to 1971, a guy named Paul Kelly became the Coast Guard keeper, moved to the island with his wife Sharon and a 4-month-old son. The Kellys had a scare one night. Out of the blue, they're awakened by creaking from inside the house and a voice shouting, "Kelly." They searched the house and found no one, and there were no boats in sight, so they decided it was the ghost of the lighthouse. And the next time the haunting repeated itself, they said they simply pulled the bedclothes over their heads and ignored it, or tried to at least. Just a quick story about Highland Light on Cape Cod, which is the oldest light station on Cape Cod, a very historic place, very beautiful place. This light was automated and destaffed in 1986. My wife's sister and her husband had a home in North Truro, and we used to see the flash of the light through the skylights. And the first time I visited here, there were still resident keepers. So it was destaffed in 1986. One of the last Coast Guard keepers was Patrick Punty, who lived at the station with his wife Catherine and 2 small children. Patrick and Catherine both said they heard the voice, I should say, voice of a ghostly woman in the keeper's house. And Patrick said couldn't understand it, but he said if I was going to be a ghost, I'd like it to be in a lighthouse. I'd stay here for the rest of my life, unquote. That's kind of a funny statement to say about a ghost. I'd stay here for the rest of my life. I'm not sure that makes sense, but anyway. So back up to Maine again, and this is actually pretty close to Burnt Island I showed a few minutes ago. This is Ram Island Light near Booth Bay Harbor, and it's got some interesting stories that date back to before there was a lighthouse there. And by the way, I'll mention that the storms, there were 2 back-to-back storms this past January that did a lot of damage at light stations in Maine. More than 20 of them had serious damage in those storms. Here at Ram Island, that footbridge or walkway you see going out to the lighthouse, which is over 100 feet long, was completely washed away. So right now it's extremely difficult to access that lighthouse, even for the Coast Guard crews who service the light. So that was one of, as I said, one of many places that had a lot of damage in those storms. So going back to the lighthouse was established in I think it was 1883, but before that, in the mid 1800s, a fisherman who narrowly escaped the rocks on the island decided that there should be some sort of aid to navigation out there. So he started hanging a lantern at night for the benefit of the local mariners. He left the area after a while, and the lantern was kept by a second keeper and then a third. The third lantern keeper, what he actually did was he anchored a dory and rigged the lamp in the bow of the dory. So it became the custom for the last fisherman coming into the harbor each day to light that lantern. That ended when the dory was smashed in a storm. For a time, the lone resident of an island close to there called Fisherman's Island maintained a lantern, but the light was too dim, and there started to be more accidents and wrecks in the area. And for some years after that, there was no light in the vicinity. Locals talked of ghosts that warned vessels away from the dangerous rocks. There's I would call it kind of a classic book, Lighthouses of the Maine Coast and the Men Who Keep Them, by Robert Thayer Sterling, who was a lighthouse keeper himself. And he told some stories in the book. He said one captain swore he was warned by a fog whistle at Ram Island during a snowstorm, which was kind of strange because there was no fog signal on the island. Another fisherman was in danger of running into the rocks when he saw a burning boat and changed his direction. The next day, he saw no trace of the burning boat or any boat of any kind. On another unusually dark night, a sailor was approaching Ram Island when he saw a woman in white waving a lighted torch over her head. The sailor veered off just in time to avoid being dashed on the rocks. Finally, a schooner helmsman claimed that a bolt of lightning illuminated the area moments before his vessel would have struck the ledges. So here's a picture of what Ram Island and the keeper's house looked like in the late 1800s. And this has really nothing to do with a ghost story, but I just love this picture. This is one of the longtime keepers at Ram Island in the late 1800s, Samuel Cavanaugh. And if you look closely, you can see he had a peg leg. It's kind of hard to believe that there were at least a few one-legged lighthouse keepers, mostly who had lost limbs in the Civil War and got lighthouse keeper jobs as kind of a show of gratitude to them. And I think Keeper Kavanaugh had a sense of humor. You see, he's holding a couple of cats there. There's another picture of him with his family where he's holding a little doll. So I have a feeling he was kind of a fun guy. And luckily, it wasn't a very tall lighthouse. If you were a one-legged keeper, you wanted to be keeper of a short lighthouse. So I've just got a quick story about Deer Island Light. If any of you know the Boston Harbor area, you might know that there was a lighthouse off of Deer Island. Deer Island is attached to the town of Winthrop, opposite Long Island. There's kind of a narrow channel there coming into the inner harbor. And the lighthouse that was at just off Deer Island was, this is an old postcard of it. It was the kind of lighthouse people often call a spark plug type light, a cast iron tower with a caisson sunk down into the bottom and filled with concrete. And the keepers lived inside the upper part of this tower. And it was always just male keepers and not families living here. The guy on the right with his family, that's a picture taken at a different lighthouse, but that's John Baxter. He was the Coast Guard's officer in charge at Deer Island in the mid 1960s, and he told me this story. He said once he was in the lighthouse during some rough weather with a young Coast Guardsman, brand new in the Coast Guard, who was sent to the lighthouse, a guy from North Carolina. The vibrations during the storm of the lighthouse caused a coffee cup to move from one side of a table to the other. Baxter suggested to the young man that the ghost of a former keeper had caused the cup to move. And I guess young guy was a little freaked out, and Baxter had a difficult time convincing him that there was no ghost. So it's just a kind of a fun example of sometimes there are other explanations, and I'll be the first to admit that. So jumping back up to Maine again, so this is Seguin Island. I think it's one of the most kind of it's not pretty exactly, but it's just a magnificent place. It's very high above the water. The light is 200 feet above the water, and it's got that gorgeous 9 foot tall first order Fresnel lens, a very powerful lens you see there in the lantern. In a previous talk, I told about the famous piano playing ghost here. I'll just quickly tell that story. The Cliff's Notes version of it is that they say in the mid 1800s there was a keeper living there with his wife. His wife became very bored, so the keeper bought her a piano. Along with the piano, she only had one piece of sheet music, and she would play that song over and over and over and over till it drove her husband insane. And they say he grabbed an axe, proceeded to chop up the piano, and proceeded to kill himself and his wife, so they say. And they say that ever since then, if you're on the island in a quiet day or night and listen carefully, you'll hear that soft, pretty piano music playing over and over. And I actually know somebody who swears she heard that, even though she knew nothing about the story before. And there was no piano and no music, but she said it sounded like a memory. So it's one of the better known lighthouse ghost story legends, certainly of New England. But there are other stories about Seguin. There's a story that there's a young girl spirit. Suppose some people say the daughter of a keeper was buried on the island, and people say she can be heard laughing and calling out to visitors or running up the lighthouse steps. I've also heard that people have heard a man coughing inside the lighthouse when nobody is there. And Bill Thompson, who is a writer and artist. Some of you may have met him in the summer. He's usually on the porch at the gift shop at Noble Light in York, Maine, selling prints of his paintings. He's a great guy. And he used to write these booklets about local history and ghost stories and stuff like that. So he said that he got this story firsthand from somebody. The story goes that when the light was automated in 1985, and a crew went out there to remove all the furniture after that. And they loaded all the furniture onto a dory that it was pulled up, I guess, onto like a boat ramp, something like that. And they were going to launch it and take the furniture back, but it was got to be late at night, so they decided to spend the night at the keeper's house before bringing the furniture back in the morning. The guy in charge of that crew said that he woke up in the middle of the night to see an old man standing at the foot of the bed, dressed in oilskins and shaking the bed. And this old man entity asked him not to take the furniture away and to leave his home alone. In the morning, the guy said, "Well, that was crazy, but that must have been a dream." So they went out and decided to move the furniture off the island, in spite of what the ghost or whatever it was that said to him. So they went to lower the boat into the water, and a cable snapped, and the boat and all the furniture went rolling down the edge of the island, and supposedly a lot of the furniture was wrecked. And I guess the ghost got his revenge. So they say. At least that's the story that Bill Thompson told. Also, I was just looking for additional material on Seguin, and on the website, there's a blog. They have seasonal caretakers who live out there in the keeper's house. And one of the caretakers wrote the following. I'm going to read, this is a quote from the website. Quote, "There have been a few suspicious incidents since we arrived on the island. Once, while alone in the keeper's quarters, I was somehow locked in the basement. What makes it even more odd is that the door has a hook and eye latch, and we have no explanation for how it happened. Twice, Maureen and I guess his wife, heard a female voice distinctly calling out, 'Hello.' Thinking guests were arriving, we pulled on our boots and ran outside, only to find the yard vacant." So this place certainly has more than its share of ghost stories. And here's an old picture of a keeper. This would be a Coast Guard keeper. And by the way, the Coast Guard took over management of our lighthouses in 1939 from the old civilian lighthouse service. So I believe this is a keeper from the Coast Guard era inside that first order Fresnel lens on Seguin Island. There's an old postcard. And here's another very famous Maine lighthouse. Some of you have probably been here. I would say it's in the top 5 most visited Maine lighthouses. Pemaquid Point, towers from 1827, another really old one. A lot of these old towers are simple, what people call rubble stone towers, just built out of local stone. So it's not like finely cut or anything. So they're rougher. Later on, they would use more carefully cut granite blocks and that kind of thing. So the keeper's house, which is a little bit out of the picture here on the right, The Keeper's House at Pembroke Point is a museum run by the town there, the town of Bristol. And there are a lot of stories. The upstairs part of the house is actually rented weekly rentals in the summer. There have been a lot of stories of sightings of a woman in a red shawl sitting near the fireplace of the keeper's house upstairs. The woman appears wet and shivering, wearing period clothes and seemingly distressed. There have also been reports of lights switching on and off and descriptions of unexplained noises from people who have rented the keeper's house upstairs. In one case, a woman in the parking lot late at night reported seeing every light in the unoccupied building suddenly turn on at once. So it definitely has some ghost stories, and it's just, I think, one of the most beautiful places on the whole New England coast. There is a book about Pembroke Point that came out about the lighthouse, the history of the lighthouse, that came out a couple of years ago. I can't quite think of the name of the author off the top of my head, but if you can find it on Amazon or whatever, I know it includes some of the ghost stories in there. And here's an old postcard of Pembroke Point. You see that fog bell tower on the right there, building with an attached tower that held the weights that ran the fog bell. That building was just smashed in those same storms I talked about in January. That building was almost completely destroyed. Just a couple of walls were left standing, but they just completed a restoration of it. So it didn't take really all that long. It's completely you wouldn't know that it had any damage at all. It looks like it was just built. I was just there a couple of weeks ago, so they've done a fantastic job. This is Hendrick's Headlight back in the Boothbay Harbor area. For some reason, the lights around there seem to have a lot of these stories. So I'm going to tell you a story here that's another one that comes from the book Maine Lighthouses and the Men Who Keep Them by Robert Thayer Sterling. But he got this story from another lighthouse keeper. It relates to the lighthouse, but some of the story doesn't really. The beginning of the story, as you'll hear, doesn't really relate to the lighthouse. Story goes that in 1931, a woman dressed in black arrived by bus in Boothbay Harbor. She registered at a local hotel as Louise Mead of Pittsburgh. She asked directions. She said she wanted to get a sweeping ocean view, and she said she wanted one last good look, whatever that meant. She was directed to a wharf in Boothbay Harbor, but she took a much longer walk to Southport, which is where Hendrick's Head Lighthouse is. She stopped at a store and asked directions to the ocean. She was directed to Hendrick's Head, but it was getting dark by that point and it was very windy. Minutes later, the lighthouse keeper from Hendrick's Head, Charles Knight, arrived at that same store, which was about 7/10 of a mile from the lighthouse. The storekeeper asked if Knight had seen the woman. He thought they would have passed each other. And he said, Keeper Knight said that he had passed an unfamiliar woman, but they exchanged no words. He said her bearing seemed normal, as though she was going somewhere, knew just where, and might even fear the approach of a strange man in the darkness. He said the woman had gray hair to her shoulders. As he walked back in the near darkness to the lighthouse, he watched for the woman, but he never saw her. Let me show you an old postcard. The woman's body was later found just offshore. It was believed that she had drowned herself, and I'm going to tell you what Sterling wrote. He said it was believed that she drowned herself, a view supported by the fact that she was found with her wrists bound by a leather belt looped through the handle of a heavy flat iron. Now, to me, how does that prove that she killed herself? If her hands were bound by a belt and a flat iron was looped through that, how did she do that herself? I don't think I could do that to myself. So that's a little fishy to me. I'm wondering if it was something other than suicide. In any case, her family couldn't be located. The woman was buried in a local cemetery there with just a small stone marking the grave. A writer later wrote in the Lewiston Journal newspaper, quote, her grave and time may be forgotten, but she will never be forgotten because she is a Maine coast legend, this shadowy figure, the Lady of the Dusk who haunts Hendrick's Head, unquote. And they say that ever since that evening in 1931, there have been reports of the lady ghost of Hendrick's Head, and she's always seen just before dusk turns to blackness. This is Long Island Headlight in Boston Harbor, and it's kind of opposite where Deer Island Lighthouse used to be across the harbor. It's a place that the public does not get to go to. It's now part of the Boston Harbor Islands National Park, but the island is off limits to the general public. I've been lucky enough to get on it a couple of times in the past. The story I'm going to tell you about Long Island Headlight House doesn't relate really to the lighthouse, but it took place right around there. So it's one of the more famous ghost stories of Boston Harbor. So here's what supposedly happened. In the spring of 1776, the British were leaving Boston Harbor after they had occupied the area for a while. And one of those ships that was leaving the harbor were newlyweds, William and Mary Burton. The local militia was firing cannonballs at the ships, and a cannonball wounded Mary Burton in the head, and she died a few hours later. She told her husband as she was dying that she did not want to be buried at sea. So the local residents took pity. They allowed William, her husband, to bury Mary on Long Island Head, around the area where the lighthouse is now, but he had no proper burial clothes to bury her in. She had a red blanket she was using to keep warm, so he took the blanket and kind of crafted a makeshift gown out of it and sewed it around her body. And he marked the grave with a piece of driftwood carved with Mary's name. And they say that she has been spotted on Long Island by fishermen and island visitors over the years. A sailor claimed to see her ghost at Fort Strong, which is parts of Fort Strong are still on the island there near the lighthouse. Each time she's seen, Mary is donning the makeshift burial gown or robe that her husband created for her. To this day, visitors report seeing a woman with muddy gray skin, and blood is usually seen streaming down her cloak from a gaping hole in the back of her head, the exact spot where the cannon fire had smashed her skull. So they say. And the guy on the right here is Marty Nally. He is a contractor who has worked on, I'm not sure how many, but dozens of lighthouse projects over the years. And I visited Long Island Headlight with him I think it was 2002, just after he had done some work out there. And he said that he found the grave of the woman in scarlet, the woman in red. I've heard both names used. And I said, "Oh, that's really interesting. Where is it?" And he took me to this area you're looking at in this picture on the left. Then he said he couldn't find it again. He said he was sure it was there, but we looked around and we couldn't find it. So I just took this picture of the general area. But Marty swore to me that he thought he had found a grave, I guess marked with some sort of simple stone in that area. So back way up the Maine coast, this is Libby Island. It's in Machias Bay, not too far from Jonestown and Machias, the towns up there. So it's almost all the way up the Maine coast, and you see it's another simple stone tower. If I remember correctly, from 1817. There used to be a keeper's house that was torn down by the Coast Guard many years ago. And I'm going to tell you a story that was told to me just kind of out of the blue, maybe 15 or 20 years ago. I was talking on the phone with an ex-Coast Guard lightkeeper, and he was telling me all about his life at the lighthouses. And we were kind of winding down the conversation, and he started laughing, and he said, some people think these lighthouses are haunted. So he's laughing about it. So I thought, well, I guess he doesn't believe in that. But then he said, well, I thought it was a joke, but then here's what happened to me. And he said that one night he was out on the grounds and looked up at the lighthouse, and he said a woman was sitting on the railing at the on the catwalk or the gallery up at the top of the lighthouse, sitting on the railing with their legs dangling down, which was, even if there was a woman there, that seems pretty unlikely. But he said he knew there was no woman on the island, and he was absolutely sure of what he saw. So he started going over to the lighthouse, but then suddenly she just wasn't there anymore. And this guy, he did not seem like a kind of guy who was going to make something like that up. And he was absolutely sure that's what he had seen. I'll just mention one other story along those lines. I don't have a picture to illustrate it, but I talked on the phone one time with the ex-lighthouse keeper from Newfoundland in Canada. And he told me that one night his wife was very ill and he was checking on her about 2 a.m. And he looked out the window of the bedroom and saw what looked like a large ship with its lights on, approaching the rocks near the lighthouse. It looked like it was going to crash into the rocks. So he went running down. He was going to try to, wave his arms and yell to try to get them to steer away. But when he got downstairs and outside, there was no ship there. And he told me he knew beyond any shadow of a doubt that he saw a ship approaching. So apparently a ghost ship. This is Marshall Point Light in Midcoast, Maine, in the little village of Port Clyde. This is, I think, one of the prettiest light stations on the coast. It's one that's not exactly your majestic lighthouse, but just such a nice scene. It's known to a lot of people as the Forrest Gump Lighthouse because in the movie Forrest Gump, Forrest runs across the country and ends his run at this lighthouse. It was actually shot there, that scene. And there's a story about Marshall Point that actually relates to the road that goes to the lighthouse. They say that on foggy nights, people claim to see the ghost of a teenager named Ben Bennett, who was murdered on the road there. Legend states that Bennett accidentally happened on a rum runner during Prohibition, and somebody was smuggling alcohol. Bennett when this person saw that Bennett had witnessed this, he was chased through the woods to Marshall Point Road and killed. And they say that ever since then, Bennett has roamed the road, seemingly running away. And witnesses have also reported seeing the rum runner with a dark beard and black boots running down the road and holding a weapon. Now, again, it's a very well-known story. It's another one that I certainly can't verify. I've never heard anything firsthand about it, but it's a great story and a very well-known one. Moving down the coast to Boone Island, I've talked about Boone Island in one of my previous talks. I talked about ex-Coast Guard keeper I talked to who from the early 1970s who firmly believed the place was haunted. One time he was away with another one of the crew out there on a boat, and they were too far from the lighthouse. They're rushing to get back to light the light at sunset, and somehow the light came on by itself, and they never figured that one out. But there are other stories as well. And I should mention that there used to be many more buildings on the island. It's not much of an island, just a little pile of rocks. But the old keepers' houses are gone. The present owner, it is privately owned now, and the present owner has built a small house that you see behind the solar panels there to the right of the lighthouse. And I'm amazed that it's actually lasted, I think maybe 3 years now. So he must have had it built pretty well. Anyway, there's a well-known story of Boone Island that's often told. And I'm going to tell you the story, but I don't think it's a true story, but I'll tell you because it's very well known. They say that people on the island will hear the cries of a ghost woman, a ghostly woman, who they say is a was a widow of a lighthouse keeper. The story goes that this young couple arrived on the island, that the man was the keeper, and in some versions of the story, you'll see names actually given to them. The keeper in some versions is said to be Luke Bright, and his wife was Kathleen or Catherine Bright. And they say that somehow he had an accident, he was hurt, and he eventually died. And that his wife tended the light as he was dying, but then she just eventually fell basically ill from her grief. And when the light dimmed and somebody went out to check, she was out there with her deceased husband still unburied. And she had basically gone out of her mind from the grief. That's the story that's often told, and that she supposedly died not much later than that, and that her ghost haunts the place. Again, there's no record whatsoever of anything like that happening out there, and there's no record of a keeper named Bright. So I think the names are made up. It may be one of these cases where people, because they've experienced strange things, they're kind of make up a backstory to try to explain what they're experiencing, but I don't really know for sure. Uh, I will tell you that a Coast Guardsman named David Wells, who was stationed there, I believe it was the 1980s, in an email, he said that one of the other Coast Guard crew had a Labrador Retriever that was normally very calm, but he said one night it chased something from one end of the island to the other and back again when nothing was there, at least nothing we could see. We figured the island must be haunted, but nothing ever bothered us, he said. This is Portland Headlight, which I would say is the most visited and photographed lighthouse in the world, not just in Maine, but I would say in the world. with more than 1.2 million visitors a year. And in the fall, they get a lot of cruise ships in Portland, and they bus people off the cruise ships to Portland Headlight. I was there a couple of weeks ago on the tour I was leading, and the woman in charge told me that that was going to be the busiest day in the history of Portland Headlight, which has been there since 1791. 47 bus loads of people were coming that day. So I was glad we were there early and getting out of there early before it got too crazy. But anyway, speaking of bus tours, I want to tell you about something that happened, I'm going to say between 15 and 20 years ago. I forget exactly what year it was. But I'll tell you about these guys in a minute. I was part of a haunted lighthouse bus tour we did. I was with Ron Kolek of New England Ghost Project, who I've talked about in these talks before. And there were also several people on that bus who consider themselves psychics. One of them was David Wells, who was the resident psychic for an English TV show called Most Haunted. And there was another young man from Wales who was a psychic. So it was pretty interesting. It was almost like dueling psychics on this trip. And there were a couple of others as well. There was a woman named Maureen Wood who works with Ron Kolek a lot, New England Ghost Project, on various investigations. And as we're about to leave Portland Headlight, everybody was on the bus except for Ron and Maureen. And I went into the keeper's house is now a museum. So I went into the museum and I saw that they were sitting on the floor in one of the museum rooms. And Maureen had her head down. She is considered a trance medium. And the theory is, or what appears to happen is that spirits actually speak through her. So she's got her eyes closed, she's looking down, and she's saying, "There's somebody here." And she said it feels really emotional. She said, "I can feel a pain in my chest, like this person she was contacting was had a pain in his chest." And when she said that, she said, "I have a pain in my chest." A woman working at the desk in the museum yelled out, "I'm calling 911." And we had to say, "No, no, no, it's okay. This is what she does." So anyway, Maureen was really getting quite emotional. I think she was crying a little bit, and she said, "I hear this man saying over and over, 'I gave my life to the light. I gave my life to the light,'" which is pretty interesting. So as we're sitting there, I'm noticing that we're in this room with a big picture on the wall of one of the keepers. The picture was Joseph Strout, who's the man on the right here. His father, Joshua Strout, is the man on the left. Between the two of them, they were the keepers at Portland Head for just about 60 years. Joshua Strout for, I think it was about 33, and then his son for 26 years. So they were like a dynasty there. So this big picture of Joseph Strout is there right near Maureen when she's saying this stuff. She said she felt that this man died of heart disease and he was very sad having to leave the lighthouse not long before he died. I don't know if it was Joshua Strout she was talking about, but it seems logical because he did die not long after he retired. I never was able to find out if he died of heart disease, but that was a really interesting experience. So now I'm getting kind of into the last part of my talk, where I'm gonna a little bit of a medley of the things I've talked about before. This is Rose Island in Newport, Rhode Island, and if you've driven back and forth over the Newport Bridge between Newport and Jamestown, you've probably seen this lighthouse right near the bridge. Beautiful place. Obviously, I took this picture at night. It is open for overnight stays. There's kind of a modern apartment upstairs. Then there's a couple of rooms furnished with period furnishings downstairs where you can stay. So beautiful. If you have a chance to stay there, don't worry about the ghosts. It's a great place to stay. But in the I'm going to say between 10 and 15 years ago, I started hearing a lot of stories about this place. A friend of mine, Dave McCurdy, was the director of the Rose Island Lighthouse Foundation, and he said that he felt very strongly it was haunted. He and his wife would sometimes sleep in the upstairs apartment, and he said they would hear footsteps and doors opening and closing. And he said that a number of people who stayed there, guests, reported the same kind of thing. This was featured in the TV show Ghost Hunters quite a few years ago now. And they certainly had some interesting experiences out there. But a lot of the experiences they had are more to do with the Fort Hamilton, that's on the island, rather than the lighthouse. But anyway, so I was part of a group in, I think it was 2013, where I went out with New England Ghost Project. And Ron Kolek, who started New England Ghost Project, has written a couple of books on the paranormal, has radio shows and so forth, was the head of the investigation. And early in the evening, Ron Kolek and Dave McCurdy, the director there, and I sat around a little table downstairs. Everybody else was upstairs. Ron said, "Let's try some table tipping," which is an old kind of spiritualist way of like what they used to do in seances and stuff like that. So we had to put our fingertips on the table, and Ron said, "If there are any spirits here, show us that you're here by moving this table, as long as you mean us no harm." And I swear to you, after a few minutes, that little table was moving around. First, it started just vibrating a little, and then it really started kind of jumping around. I would not believe it if I wasn't there. I kept looking carefully. None of us were touching it except for our fingertips. So then we all went upstairs, and I believe it was six people sat around this big, heavy oak table. And again, Ron said, if there are any spirits here, let us know you're here by moving the table, as long as you mean us no harm. And I'm going to play you a video here, and you see there's two videos on the screen. I'm going to play it in two parts because I cut out a middle part where there are a couple of comments that were sort of on the R-rated side, so I decided to cut them out. So I'm going to play it as two clips. But you're going to see this is well into this table tipping or tilting, table tilting or table tipping. I've heard both session. And again, it started as like a fine vibration in our fingertips, but then the table started moving more and more. And again, I would not believe it if I wasn't there. I was looking under the table. Nobody's legs were touching it, just fingertips. So I'm going to play you. This was with an infrared camera in the room. So here's the first part of the clip.
Right, by the way. Look out, brother. Rocket. Let's see if we can do it. Let's do it.
Can you lift it up? Can you make it actually go off the floor?
It's almost
just
like
an
an
inch.
inch. All right, keep rocking it, rock it.
Yeah.
Just rock it, rock it, rock it. Let's see if we can do it. Let's do it.
Those meters have moved, right, by the way. Look how far they're different.
Yeah,
the table rock.
because the table's rocking.
Yeah.
This one's gonna rock it through Clay's chest in a minute.
Oh, man, this is amazing. All right, we're going. You gonna do it? All right, we're getting faster. Come on.
Coughing.
Get the momentum going.
Use our energy. We give it freely as long as we know how. Just one more big push.
I see that some of us aren't even really touching the table.
I'm like,
I'm trying to do like 2 fingers on it. My hands go with it, though, because I'm so freaking tall.
Okay, so in the next minute or so, they kept getting people were. It was like 2 a.m. and people were getting kind of rowdy and silly. And I swear to you, the more people were laughing and carrying on, it seemed like the whatever it was feeding off our energy, and the table was moving more. So here it is near the end here.
Go for it, Mr. Kirby. Lift it, lift it, lift it, lift it, lift it, lift it.
Oh, here we go.
Yeah! Lift it, lift it. Oh my God, it came up off the ground. That was wild.
So I don't think it completely came off the floor there, but it was pretty close at the end there. And another thing that was weird is this was a really heavy table. It was hard to lift. And we checked it, it was definitely, we moved it a bit when we started doing this. It was definitely, well put together. It wasn't loose or anything. At the end of this session, the joints in the table were loose, as if somebody had loosened all the screws and stuff. And then we looked at it again later, and it seemed to have tightened up again. So that was pretty bizarre. So this is New London Ledge Light down in Connecticut, between New London and Groton, Connecticut, at the mouth of the Thames River. Beautiful building built in 1909. The keepers and families in this case lived inside there. Get the lighthouse lantern on the roof. Very, very unusual, one of a kind lighthouse. And has a very famous lighthouse ghost story, the story of supposed ghost named Ernie. They say that in the 1930s, a keeper named Ernie was living there with his wife. The wife became very bored. He was away getting supplies. He came back and found a note from his wife saying that she had run away with the captain of the Block Island ferry. And they say that Ernie went to the roof of the lighthouse and dove off to his death. So they say. And they say that ever since then, people have experienced a lot of strange things out there. So I got to go out there again with New England Ghost Project. This was back in, I believe it was 2006. I think it was 2006. Yeah. And we went out with the TV crew from a show called American Builder. Comcast Cable used to produce it. And you see Ron Kolex, the guy with the tan baseball cap on there. Maureen Wood, who I mentioned before at Portland Headlight. The trance medium is the woman with the curly blonde hair. The young guy with the maroon baseball cap was one of the hosts of American Builder, Jimmy something or other, who was very skeptical before this night, not so much afterwards. The woman with the long hair is Karen Mossy, who is a EVP or electronic voice phenomena expert for New England Ghost Project. So early in the evening, people sat around at the Ouija board, as you see there on the right, and not a whole lot was happening with that. So then they were holding hands, and things started to happen. And I'm actually going to play. I'm going to play you a clip from the show. Uh, they edited the clip a little strangely, so it looks like the stuff starts happening while people were playing with the Ouija board, which wasn't exactly how it happened, but that's not that important. But I'll show you this clip and then I'll say a little bit more about it. Whoops. Sorry, I forgot the order I had things in here. You probably just heard that sound there. Before I play the video clip, I mentioned that Karen Mossy is an expert on what's called electronic voice phenomena or EVPs. So she and other people who do this kind of thing will use recorders at a place like this and often ask questions into the recorder. And the idea is that even if when it's not heard audibly at the time, sometimes you play back these recordings and you get voices on them. There's a lot of debate about how that happens, but it's a technique that goes back to the early days of sound recording. So Karen recorded some EVPs at New London Ledge Lighthouse, and this was one of them that was recorded outside in the wee hours of the morning, outside on the deck outside the lighthouse. And she believed that this whispery voice is saying, "Help me, I'm cold." So here it is. So I hope you could hear that. Not super distinct, but it does kind of sound like "Help me, I'm cold." We don't know where that came from. There's a legend about a sailboat wreck there and a family dying, but there's no proof of that. And I should mention there's no proof of the keeper named Ernie, but I'm going to say more about that in a minute. So here's a clip from the show, as I was saying. So again, this is early in the evening as things started to happen.
You want us to leave?
You might have to turn up your sound a little.
Well, we have no way to get out of here, so we have to stay. Who are you?
It's almost getting like a warning, though.
A warning?
Yeah, like, yeah, there's something upstairs.
Holy.
Who is here with us?
Is there anyone with us
Yeah,
now? Why are we here?
yeah.
Do you like us here?
You are interfering. Please leave. Please leave. Now.
You know you were dead. It's time for you to go.
Someone else here.
Someone else here?
Angry.
Someone angry? Oh, we got a new visitor. Who is here with us now?
You lie. You lie. You lie. So angry. They left me
Where?
outside. Top of
Are you on the roof of the lighthouse?
the...
Are you on the
Let
roof?
me down. Let me down.
They left you up on the roof of the lighthouse?
You all right?
She's fine. Maureen? No. Push him out. Push him out, Maureen. Maureen, push him out. Push him out, Maureen. Cut the film. Cut the film.
Okay, so whoops. Let me go back for a second here. I know Maureen fairly well, and I'll tell you those moments where she's looking at Ron with that weird look in her face. At the time, I saw that and I thought, well, Maureen's not home. It really seemed like somebody else was was looking at him. So it was pretty interesting being there that night. And to just finish this part, just to cut to the chase, Maureen felt from what she experienced there that she said the spirit here is not a lighthouse keeper. She said he was a construction worker who was locked out on the roof as a prank by his fellow construction workers, and he slipped and fell to his death when he was trying to get back in. And she says he's angry. It's a very angry spirit because his death was covered up. And obviously because of what was done to him, but also because people are getting the story wrong. Everybody thinks it was a lighthouse keeper and it was actually a construction worker. So again, there's no record of a keeper named Ernie or any death out there. So her story of a construction worker whose death was covered up actually is more believable to me, but there's no proof that anything like that happened. But it was certainly an interesting night. So back up to Maine. I got two more lighthouses I'm going to tell you about, and I'll try to make it fairly quick. This is Owl's Head Light up in Midcoast, Maine, near Rockland, and it has been called the most haunted lighthouse in America. It dates back to 1825. You see the keeper's house on the left and a walkway and then stairs going up to the lighthouse, which is just a short brick tower, but the light's 100 feet above Penobscot Bay there at the entrance to Rockland Harbor. And believe it or not, that's me on the far left. That's in 1988 with Mac Rouse, Malcolm or Mac Rouse, who was the last Coast Guard keeper of Owl's Head Light. They're in the process of automating it when I visited there. And he told me he believed the place was haunted. He said his wife saw a woman in a window when nobody was there, and their young son kept saying he saw a woman sitting in a chair in the kitchen even though nobody was there, and he said he absolutely insisted on it. The later I met a guy named John Norton, who was the keeper about 1980 before Mac Rouse. And John Norton told me one night he was in an upstairs bedroom and said he was wide awake, knew he was awake, and he saw the face of an old man looking at him in the room, and then it disappeared. And then the next people there were a couple named Andy and Denise German, Germann, and they had a lot of experiences. But one night they're in bed, but Andy realized he had to go outside. He went out. While he was gone, Denise said that it looked like the indentation of a person moving around in the bed next to her, which was pretty weird. So when Andy came back, he said he saw what he described as like a phosphorescent figure move through the wall into the room. And those two things seem to kind of coincide. So then the next family to arrive was the Grahams. You see here on the right, Gerard Graham and his wife Debbie and their little daughter Claire. They're by the beautiful Fresnel lens in the lighthouse there. So when they moved in, the Germans said the place is haunted and you don't want to use that one upstairs bedroom. It's the most haunted part of the house. The Grahams laughed and they made that their daughter Claire's bedroom. And the whole time they lived there, she had an imaginary friend, she said was an old sea captain. One night, really late at night, Gerard and Debbie were asleep. 3-year-old Claire came into the room, woke them up, and said, "Time to put the horn on. Fog's rolling in." So they never said anything like that to her, and they couldn't figure out where that came from. And this picture was sent to me some years ago by a man named Bob D'Amato in Connecticut. He took it late at night. The only other person there was behind him. This is from the top of the stairs near the lighthouse, looking down at the oil house on the left there, where they used to store kerosene. And the flagpole is a few seconds exposure, so you see the flag is blurred. The interesting part is to the right of the flagpole, in front of the fence there. I'll show you what it looks like when you zoom in. Here it is. And I know I showed this before 2 years ago, but I wanted to share it again for people who might have missed it because I think this is one of the most interesting pictures of its type I've ever seen. And I know that he didn't Photoshop it or fake it in any way. I got to know him. I had dinner with him and his father, and he was pretty shocked that he had this in his picture. All right, last lighthouse I'm going to talk about just for a few minutes is Portsmouth Harbor. 10 minutes from my home here. I live in Portsmouth, and this is in Newcastle, little town next to Portsmouth. First lighthouse here, 1771, was the first lighthouse north of Boston, but it's been rebuilt a couple of times. Next to a historic old fort, Fort Constitution, and all of it is on Coast Guard Station, Portsmouth Harbor. This guy, Joshua Card, was the longest serving keeper, 1874 to 1909, 35 years, until he was 86 years old, oldest keeper in the country at the time he retired. He's wearing the old Lighthouse Service uniform in these pictures. He was a local guy. He's from Newcastle. They say he loved the area, loved showing people around when they would visit his lighthouse. And they say that if people asked him, "What does the K in your uniform stand for?" and it had the letter K on the lapels, they would say, "What does that stand for?" And he would say, "Why, Captain, of course." So I think he liked being called Captain as a sign of respect. I think he knew how to spell, but he was definitely known as Captain Card. So, um, whoops, I'm sorry. I I forgot how I in some couple of cases how I put this together. So anyway, so he was known as Captain Card. So in 2005, uh, I had heard a lot of stories from the Coast Guard about weird things happening there. So we called in New England Ghost Project in the summer of 2005. And Karen Mossy, the EVP person again, recorded some interesting things. And one of the things she recorded was in the lighthouse after midnight and at the top of the stairs. And here's what she got. You'll hear Karen's voice saying, "Who's there?" And then she seems to get an answer. I'll play it again. It's not super distinct, but Karen feels it's saying captain or maybe the captain, kind of like that. So that's why I told you about how Joshua Card liked being called captain. Is that him? Of course, there's no way we can know that, but it's interesting speculating about it. Here's Ron and Maureen and Karen of New England Ghost Project that night in the watch room at the top of the stairs. And I'm going to play you another EVP that was actually recorded another night later on. You're going to hear Ron Kolek's voice asking, "Do you like us being here?" And he seems to get a reply.
You like us being here? You like us being here?
And I'm going to play you another one that was recorded just seconds after that. Jim Stonier of New England Ghost Project asks a question, and he seems to get an answer.
I think you should check the light.
Sounds like okay to me.
I think you should check the light.
It's interesting that these EVPs all seem to have a kind of a raspy, older male voice. I'm one of several people who's actually heard a voice audibly in the lighthouse. It was one afternoon I was giving a tour for a young couple, and as I'm talking, I heard hello like that, and it seemed like there was somebody just behind a wall at the top of the stairs near us, and I looked, there was nobody there. I asked the couple, and the man said he heard a man say hello. His wife didn't hear anything. We looked around, there was nobody there at all. Uh, One of our volunteers was up in the lantern room by himself one day, and he heard, "What are you doing?" And again, nobody there. My wife was there by herself taking down decorations once, and she said it sounded like somebody barked something right in her ear, but there was nobody there. And people have seen things too, but the voice has been a fairly common thing. This picture was taken during an investigation by another paranormal group called Sauhegan Paranormal from Nashua, New Hampshire. This is out in the middle of the grounds of the fort late at night, and that woman said that she felt something touching the back of her neck. Somebody snapped this picture a few seconds after she said that, and this is what they got, just a little point and shoot camera. And it looks like a blob of light, and it kind of looks like something sticking out of it touching the back of her neck. I showed this once to a group, and a guy from England, a paranormal researcher, said, "That's a moth." He said a moth flew in front of the camera and the picture was taken. My feeling is if that's a moth that happened to fly into the picture at that exact second, right after she had said something was touching the back of her neck, that's a miracle in itself. So whatever's going on here, it's pretty interesting. And these pictures were taken from inside the fort late at night during our first ever nighttime event. A woman named Veronica took these. I was standing right near her at the time. She showed them to me on her camera viewfinder. She couldn't believe it. All her other pictures look normal. This is about 11 o'clock at night, completely quiet. This is looking out from inside the fort out at the Coast Guard station. Nothing going on out there. No lights. Well, there's one distant light, or a couple of distant lights you can see on the left there, but basically very quiet, no movement at all. But she got these weird pictures of what looks like a green mist flying through there. There was an accidental explosion in the fort, July 4th, 1809, that killed 10 people. There was never really a battle there, but there was that accident, and several of them were children, and some people blame the odd events in the fort on that event. So that brings me to the end of my part three, even more haunted lighthouses. Here's some more sources of information. My own website is newenglandlighthouses.net. You can look up New England Ghost Project and see what they've got going on. They do events around the area, uh, based in Drake, Mass, and U.S. Lighthouse Society. I'm the historian for the society, and American Lighthouse Foundation. I used to be the president of that organization, so they both mean a lot to me. So I'm going to come out of screen sharing, and I see some little applause thingies coming up the screen. That's pretty cool. So I'm going to come out of screen sharing here. All
Great.
right. Hi.
I love that. Hey, that was awesome. Amazing. And I'm just gonna go right into this because we have a few minutes and I want to get to some questions. But
Yeah.
Jenny said in the chat when you were talking about Boone Island that her father was the keeper in the early 70s and swore it was haunted. And
What was his name?
yep, and the dog was a Labrador Smoky that they were talking about running across. So I know you
I
had said
wonder what her father's name was. I'm really curious.
it was Bob or
Bob
Robert.
Roberts?
Yeah, Bob Roberts.
Well, he's the one I talk about all the time in my lecture. He's the one I talk to on the phone. So I'd love to.
Bob Roberts.
Um, so you say it's in the audience, it's her father we're talking about.
Jenny. Yep.
Jenny, if you're hearing this right now, let me get in the chat. I'm pretty easy to find. You can email me at jeremy@uslhs.org. I'll put it in the chat, but I would love to hear more from you. But
That's
I did
awesome.
talk to your dad maybe 20 years ago now.
Oh my
So
gosh. Wow, what a small
yeah,
world. Okay, Jenny, you know what you have to do. Okay. So I'm
I
going to
just put
start
my
with
email
questions.
in the chat.
Perfect. I'm gonna start with some questions. Fred says he's an old friend from GBH. A long time ago, I did a show with Edward Rowe Snow, the flying Santa who dropped presents to the families in the lighthouses. Did you ever
Yeah,
meet him? And have you
I
ever?
did a
Oh,
couple
you
of
did?
times. This is Fred Barzik,
Yes.
could it be?
Yep.
Fred, how are you? It's nice to. It's been a while. Sure. I remember you very well, Fred. Good. I can't see you, but it's good to be in the same virtual room with you. Yes, I did meet Edward Snow a couple of times, and his daughter's a really good friend, Dolly Bicknell. And I would say I wouldn't be in all this trouble today if it wasn't for Edward Snow. I kind of blame him for my interest in maritime history and lighthouses and everything. So yeah, he was a pretty amazing guy. So I could go on about Edward Snow, but
But you did meet him.
good to see
Okay.
you, Fred. Yep.
Um, William says, this is comment. I'm rehearsing for play at a holiday mass, so I'm playing the same song over and over and over. I hope none of my neighbors have an axe.
Yeah, I hope so too for your sake. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Lizzie Borden's parents thought the same thing. Um, Lois asks, did other lighthouses beside the Pemaquid Point have foghorns? I haven't heard about them very much.
Yeah, a lot of them did. A lot of them had fog bells too. Well, actually Pembroke Point had a fog bell. The ones that had bells, they had striking machinery. The keeper would have to crank it up every couple of hours, like a clockwork mechanism, and a hammer would strike the bell every so many seconds, and they would recognize, if say it was one strike every 15 seconds, people would recognize that.
Hmm.
It's before GPS, so it's the best they could do. But a lot of them also had fog horns. Some of them were steam operated. They'd have to fire up, with coal boilers, get them operating, and they would make a really loud sound. Later air compressors and now electronic horns. But now the modern electronic horns are controlled by people from their boats with their VHF radios. So you almost never hear them anymore. People don't really use the fog signals anymore.
Janet says, you had a picture and story of Deer Island Light. Was that in Maine or Massachusetts?
Massachusetts. There's Deer Isle in Maine, but this is Deer Island, Massachusetts, which used to have a prison, now has the sewage plant for the Boston area. But it's just off the town of Winthrop in Boston Harbor.
Okay.
So yeah.
She was just saying that the label in the picture said Maine, and she's the
Oh, did
librarian,
it?
so yes, she is correct.
Oh, good catch.
Okay. I just
Wow.
saw in
I'll
the
have to
chat that
fix
she's a
that.
librarian, so
I
good for you.
must have that's the dangers of copying and pasting. I probably copied and pasted from the different slide and forgot to change that. So
Yeah.
thank you for noticing that.
Okay. So my husband and I stayed in one of the rooms in the museum at Rose Island. We did not hear any unusual noises. Maybe just there on the wrong day.
Yeah.
Um,
They don't perform on command, of course. Yeah.
that's right. So we have another friend of yours, Brett. Hello, Jeremy. This is Suzanne Okoa from the Omni Theater where we worked
Oh,
at.
wow. I'm getting all these blasts from the past.
She said,
Hi.
I'm
Hi,
looking
Suzanne.
forward to a lighthouse stay, and I'm so glad to see you here.
Thank you, Suzanne. Wow. It's been even longer than Fred Barzik, I think. I worked at the Museum of Science, Omni Theater from 1987 to 91, so it's been
Oh,
a while.
you have really kind of done it all. William says there appears that something that looks like an orb by the flagpole in one of the final shots. I know that he had mentioned that in the chat as well.
That must have been the Owl's Head
Mhm.
slide. I'm not gonna share my screen again, but as you can keep going. Whoops. Sorry. Let me um you can keep talking. I'm gonna find that slide and see if I can see anything.
Um,
Oh,
so Jessica asked if we get a copy of the presentation. I don't think so, but you can certainly watch the video again and you'll see all the slides again. Um,
right. Yeah, I'm not seeing an orb. There is a spot sort of in the bottom of the picture in front of that figure, but I think it's something on the ground, like a rock or something.
okay.
So unless it's a
Pam,
different picture he's talking about. Yeah.
Pam asks, do you have any theories on why the activity occurs primarily late at night?
Well, that's a question that people ask a lot about, paranormal stuff in general. And I've heard it said, and I think it's accurate, that the world is quieter at night. So people tend to notice more. If you're in a house in the middle of the night and there's no sound at all, you're going to notice whether it's a creak or footsteps or whatever it is. Um, I think that kind of explains it. The world is quieter at night, but people have plenty of experiences during the day as
Mhm.
well. I think they're just busy with other things and there's more noise around and everything, so they're not noticed as much.
Oh, he says it is right at the top of the flagpole above the crossbeam.
Okay.
Okay. So I just want to remind people, if you have questions, to put them in the Q&A, which is the button at the bottom of your screen, because I've kind of lost track of the questions in the chat. They went by so quickly.
Is this the picture we're talking about?
Let's see. Oh, the flagpole. Oh, yeah. Is that it?
I'm not seeing. I see the blurred flag, and I see there's the usual ball at the top of the flagpole, but I don't really see anything I would call an orb in there. But
No, there
maybe
seems to be like a little bit of light on the top of it, but
the light is uneven, but um, again, maybe I'm missing something, but I'm not seeing it I think that's the only picture that has a flagpole in it.
hmm.
Yeah.
I love this question. Do you and your team ever fear for your life?
Well, first of all, that's not really my team. I mean, I've taken part in some of these things with New England Ghost Project, but I wouldn't refer to it as my team. Do you ever fear for your life? Okay, no, the answer is no. But at Rose Island, we did that table tipping thing.
Hmm.
When we were downstairs, first I was saying how we did the small table and then went to the bigger table. When Ron and Dave, the director there, and I were sitting around the small table, I told you how it's like a just a slight vibration at first, and more. Its table started going boom, 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 and it started like moving around in a circle at one point, like boom, 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 and it came right up against me, and it was kind of not like pressing hard, but it came right up against my chest, and I said, kind of half kiddingly, I said, "Please don't hurt me," and I was mostly kidding, but to this day, Ron likes to tell people about that. And he says, and then Jeremy said, please don't hurt me. I did not say it like that. So I told them, oh, yeah, maybe I should have some t-shirts printed up that say, please don't hurt me. Can wear
But
them.
you weren't afraid. You weren't afraid you were going to get hurt or
I
anything.
was a little nervous when it moved right, but I honestly, no, I wouldn't say I was really afraid. I would say a little nervous.
Oh.
Well, I get a
Um,
little, at times when I've been at Portsmouth Harbor Light with some of these groups, sometimes I have to go back and shut the lights off and close up the lighthouse and lock it up when nobody else is around. It might be 2 a.m. or something. It's a little creepy.
mhm.
But again, I don't feel exactly. I wouldn't say afraid is the word, but it's a little creepy.
That is creepy. And somebody else in the chat said, especially during the one where you were like shaking, like that one, that they would be freaking out, which I agree with.
The table.
Yeah, that was
That
wild.
was pretty weird. I did this talk recently somewhere else at in person at a library, and there was a woman with two kids. I was a little nervous about these kids. They were probably about 10 or something like that, but they were pretty mature. And the boy said to me afterwards, he said, "Are you sure nobody's legs were touching that table?" And yeah, I was sure. And he wouldn't believe me, but I was there and I was looking under the table. I swear to you, nobody was touching it except for fingertips and lightly. At times I was taking my hands off. Other people were doing that too. So there were times when only three or four people had their fingertips touching that big table and it was going
Mhm.
like that. So
Well, we have to, we have to double check and make sure that it's legit. But I believe you, Jeremy.
I call
Um,
myself an open-minded skeptic. I try not to believe everything I hear, or, even everything I see, but I can't deny it either when I have an experience like that. I
yeah.
firmly believe there's something to it. I don't know the answers, but
Mhm.
I know there's something to it.
I'm a total believer. Um, Anne asked what I think is going to be our last question. Did you become interested in hauntings from histories of many lighthouses that had legends, or were you first interested in ghosts? Do you think there's something about the isolation of the lighthouses that causes links to the spirit
Hmm.
world?
That's a great question. I like that.
Yeah.
I would say actually my interest in ghosts predates my interest in lighthouses. Yeah. So when I was a little kid, I I remember distinctly being probably 7 or 8 years old and seeing a talk show on TV where they were talking about ghost stuff, and it's kind of scared me. And I thought, wow, this stuff, they're really serious about it. This sounds real, and that really stuck with me. So I had an interest in that for a long time. And then I didn't get interested in lighthouses until the 1980s. But then eventually they two kind of cross paths. But
But
yeah, so that was a really good question. And as I said at the beginning of this one, it's amazing how many lighthouses have ghost stories in there somewhere. The more you look, the more you find. Yeah.
well, I mean, that's part of her question is that is there something
Something about
special?
specific about lighthouses. Oh, right. I forgot that part of the question. Some people think that water has something to do with it, that water is almost like a conductor of paranormal things. Like, there's all kinds of
Mhm.
theories, and I can't say, but I know that's one theory. Almost like water is like a recording medium or something like that, but I'm not sure that makes sense to me. But because the tide comes in and out, so it changes every day. Uh, but I'll tell you that lighthouse keepers were very emotionally attached to their lighthouses. It was a really strong emotional attachment. So I think in a lot of cases, a lot of the stories of supposedly haunted lighthouses have to do with keepers of the past. And the thought that they could be so attached to that place that they couldn't let go even after death, that's
Mhm.
not that hard for me to believe. So, yeah.
Also, it seems like kind of a danger. I mean, like a lot of people have died at those lighthouses. Like
Yeah,
like because they're keepers, they actually live there. They don't like go home to someplace else.
right. That was their home. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but of course, there are cases. If you believe some of these cases, like say Joshua Card of Portsmouth Harbor Light, he didn't die there; he died somewhere else. But that doesn't seem to be a requirement. If somebody is emotionally attached to a place like he was, it makes sense to me that he might still be there in some form, even if he didn't actually die there.
Have you watched that show Ghosts on TV on CBS?
No.
It's not about a lighthouse. It's about a mansion that has all these ghosts on it, and somebody, that living can see them, and they cannot leave the property where they died. So that's where that thought was coming from.
So this is a reality series kind of thing,
No,
or no?
it's a
It's a
sitcom.
dramatic series.
It's a sitcom.
Oh, it's a sitcom. Okay.
It's hilarious. There's a British one
Okay.
and there's an English,
Oh,
an American one.
I'll
So
have
if
to
you ever
check
get,
that out.
oh, you should. It's one of my favorite shows.
The
But
paranormal shows like Ghost Hunters and others, I those frustrate me, and so I don't watch them anymore because it's all about ratings, as far as I'm concerned, not so much about really looking into the subject.
Mhm. Well, I love all the research that you do and the stories that you tell. So thank you once again. Um, for an amazing conversation. And I just want to remind everybody who's still here that Jeremy will be back with us in March, and I will send a link to that in the recap email because we just can't get enough of our lighthouses. And apparently, like the haunted ones really are fascinating to us. So once again, thank you, Jeremy, for doing this, and thank you all for being here and all of your wonderful questions and your enthusiasm for this topic that is so close to my heart as well. So
Thank
I
you
hope
all so
you have a
much.
great night. Happy Halloween. And I hope you see some spirits. Jeremy, it was
All
awesome
right.
to see you again.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, everyone.